Even the beasts know better than to acknowledge you." The words cut through Lyra like shattered glass, each syllable a familiar blade twisting deeper into wounds that never quite healed. She felt them settle into her bones the way they always did, heavy and final. Beta Marcus stood above her as she knelt in the mud beside the injured war beast's pen, his voice carrying across the compound for everyone to hear. She had learned long ago not to flinch. That had always been enough. To be invisible, to endure, to survive another day in a world that had decided her worth before she could even speak. Lyra kept her hand steady as she cleaned the gash across the massive wolf's flank, her touch gentle despite the trembling that threatened to betray her. The war beast, a scarred grey male named Storm, leaned into her ministrations with a trust that made her chest ache. He knew. Somehow they always knew that she would never hurt them. "Look at her!" Seraphina's voice floated from the training grounds, sweet as poisoned honey. "Even the Omega refused to associate with her. What does that make her, I wonder?" Less than nothing. The answer whispered through Lyra's mind in her own voice, practiced and automatic. She had spent 19 years being told exactly what she was, and she had learned to believe it. The daughter of no one, claimed by no pack, useful only for the tasks that even the lowest-ranking wolves found beneath them. The compound buzzed with unusual energy today. Tomorrow the Alpha King would arrive with his legendary war beast for the trials that would determine which warriors would join his elite guard. The pack had been preparing for months, grooming their finest, polishing their reputations like weapons. Seraphina, with her gleaming golden fur and beta bloodline, stood at the centre of it all, like a sun drawing lesser planets into her orbit. Lyra existed in the shadows they cast. "The Alpha King's warbeast has never bowed to anyone except him," one of the younger warriors was saying as he passed her pen. "They say Fenrir is more demon than wolf, forged in battle and baptized in enemy blood." "He'll choose only the strongest," another replied. "The worthy ones." Lyra's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. Worthy. The word felt foreign in her mouth, like a language she had never learned to speak. Storm nudged her palm with his massive head, a gesture of comfort that made her throat tighten with gratitude she could never voice. The bloodlines will reveal themselves when least expected. Elder Thorn's weathered voice drifted from the temple steps, where he often sat watching the compound's daily rhythms. His pale eyes found hers across the distance, and for a moment something flickered there that she couldn't name. Ancient truths have a way of surfacing when the moon wills it. But Lyra knew better than to hope for ancient truths or revealed bloodlines. She was exactly what she appeared to be. Nothing special, nothing hidden, nothing worth discovering. Her wolf had never stirred, never given her even the smallest sign that she belonged among the pack's hierarchy. She existed in the grey space between human and wolf, claimed by neither world. The war beast compound stretched before her like a second home, filled with creatures that bore the scars of countless battles in service to their alpha. She knew each beast's temperament, each wound's history, each preference for healing herbs or gentle words. They trusted her in ways that their own handlers never achieved, responding to her touch with a peace that everyone noticed but no one questioned. "Clean the south pens when you finish with Storm," Marcus barked from across the yard. "The Alpha King's inspection will include the facilities. Everything must be perfect." Perfect. As if her presence wouldn't already taint whatever perfection they hoped to achieve. Lyra nodded silently, her gaze fixed on Storm's healing wound. The gash was deep but clean, inflicted during a recent skirmish with rogues that had tested the pack's borders. He would carry the scar forever, but he would survive. She made sure of that. Tomorrow, when the Alpha King arrived with power that could shake mountains and a war beast that had never known defeat, the pack would present their finest offerings. Warriors who could shift into wolves the size of horses, females whose beauty and bloodlines promised strong alliances, political connections that could secure their territory for generations. And Lyra would clean the pens where the legendary Fenrir would rest, invisible as always, forgotten as always, exactly as the world preferred her to be. Storm's golden eyes met hers as she finished treating his wound, and for just a moment she saw something there that looked almost like recognition, almost like he was waiting for something. But that was impossible, wasn't it? War beasts served their alpha, respected strength, bowed only to power. And she was nothing. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing. The compound settled into evening stillness around her, the familiar rhythm of her invisible existence continuing unchanged. Tomorrow would bring the Alpha King and his trials, but tonight belonged to her and the beasts who somehow found comfort in her worthless hands. Tomorrow would change nothing. It never did. But as Lyra made her way toward the South Pens, Elderthorn's words echoed in the growing darkness, and something deep in her chest stirred for just a moment before settling back into silence. Bloodlines will reveal themselves when least expected. The moon hung full and silver above the compound, casting everything in ethereal light. And in that light, just for a heartbeat, Lyra almost looked like someone else entirely. The silver light that erupted from Lyra's skin turned midday into something approaching the sacred. Power didn't just flow through her, it detonated. 19 years of suppressed royal blood broke free in a cascade of supernatural energy that made every wolf present drop into instinctive submission. The very air shimmered around her as ancient magic reclaimed its rightful vessel, transforming the servant girl into the queen she had always been meant to be. Her hair blazed silver white like moonlight given form. Her golden eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom flowing through awakened bloodlines. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known defeat, power radiating from her in waves that made the strongest alpha tremble. "Behold!" Elderthorn's voice carried across the stunned compound. "The silver moon rises again." Seraphina's carefully constructed mask of perfection finally shattered completely. "This is impossible! She's nothing, she's nobody. We made sure—" "You made sure of nothing." Lyra's voice carried supernatural authority that cut through protests like a blade through silk. "You murdered children and called it politics. You suppressed royal blood and called it necessity. You orchestrated war and called it alliance." The war beasts surrounding her began to shift their positions, forming a protective circle that left no doubt about where their loyalty resided. Fenrir padded to her side, his massive form dwarfed by the power emanating from his true alpha. Even the visiting dignitaries' own guards found themselves backing away from the awakened queen, their wolves recognizing authority that transcended political convenience. "The ceremony will continue," Seraphina declared, but her voice had lost its honeyed confidence. "The alliance must be sealed, or there will be no alliance with murderers." Kyle stepped away from the altar, his movement fluid and decisive as he crossed the space between them. "There will be no ceremony with anyone except my true mate." When he reached Lyra, something extraordinary happened. The moment their hands touched, golden light exploded between them, visible to every witness present. The mate bond that had been stretched thin by denial and distance snapped back into perfect alignment, creating a connection so profound that everyone watching could feel its power. "You are my mate," Kyle said, his voice carrying across the compound with absolute certainty. "You are my queen. You are everything I have ever needed." "And you are mine," Lyra replied, her power flowing into their bond until it blazed like a star between them. The formal mating bite happened without ceremony or political consideration. Kyle's teeth found the curve of her neck, while hers found his, ancient ritual completed with supernatural efficiency. The bond sealed with force that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd, marking them as permanently and irrevocably joined. Seraphina's shriek of rage cut through the moment like poisoned glass. "You've doomed your kingdom. The Eastern armies will—" will find themselves facing something they never expected. Lyra turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of awakened royalty. I am Lyanna of the Silver Moon dynasty, rightful queen of the Northern Territories, commander of every war beast within 100 miles of this place. As if summoned by her declaration, war beasts began emerging from the forest, not just the compound's trained fighters, but wild creatures that had never known human command. Dozens of them, then scores, all padding into the ceremonial space to bow before their awakened queen. The Silver Moon bloodline carries abilities your Eastern allies never accounted for, Lyra continued, her golden eyes fixed on Seraphina's pale face. We don't just command individual wolves, we command the very essence of what it means to be wild. The demonstration that followed redefined everything the assembled witnesses thought they knew about supernatural power. Lyra raised her hands, silver light flowing from her fingers like liquid starlight. Every war beast present began to glow with reflected radiance, their already impressive forms growing larger, stronger, more deadly. The bond between queen and beasts became visible as golden threads connecting her to dozens of supernatural warriors whose loyalty transcended death itself. "This is what you tried to destroy," she said, her voice carrying across the compound with perfect clarity. "This is what you murdered my family to prevent." Seraphina's enforcers moved then, desperate to salvage something from their collapsed conspiracy. Silver-coated weapons appeared in their hands as they lunged toward the awakened queen, hoping to complete what assassins had failed to accomplish. They never reached her. Fenrir's roar shook the very foundations of the earth as he intercepted the attack. Behind him, every war beast in the compound followed suit, creating a wall of supernatural fury between their queen and any who would harm her. The enforcers disappeared beneath several tons of protective loyalty, their screams cut short by decisive action. "The Eastern armies," Lyra said, her attention turning to the delegation members who cowered at the ceremony's edge, "will find themselves facing not just our pack's warriors, but every wild creature in the Northern Territories, every wolf that has ever run free, every beast that remembers what it means to answer the call of true royalty." To demonstrate her point, howls began rising from the surrounding forest. Not the howls of trained war beasts, but the wild songs of free wolves responding to their awakened queen. Hundreds of voices, then thousands, creating a symphony that spoke of supernatural forces gathering in response to ancient bloodlines, finally claiming their birthright. "This is impossible," one of the delegation members whispered. "Nothing is impossible when the goddess wills it," Elder Thorn replied, his weathered face bright with satisfaction. "The Silver Moon dynasty ruled for 3 centuries before your conspiracy destroyed them. Did you really think their power would stay buried forever?" Kyle moved to stand beside his mate, their combined presence creating a force that made every political calculation suddenly irrelevant. "Send word to your Eastern allies," he told the trembling delegation. "Tell them the Northern Territories are under new management. Tell them the Silver Moon Queen has awakened, and she remembers every crime committed against her bloodline." "Tell them," Lyra added, silver light dancing around her like living flame, "that if they value their lives, they'll withdraw their armies and never return." The delegation scattered like leaves before a hurricane, their political ambitions crumbling in the face of supernatural reality. Within minutes, the ceremonial space held only those loyal to the true royal pair and the war beasts who had chosen their side in the conflict. "What happens now?" Kale asked, his hand finding hers as golden light continued to pulse between them. "Now," Lyra replied, her voice carrying the weight of destiny finally embraced, "we take back everything they stole from us." The Silver Moon had risen again, and the world would never be the same. Justice came at dawn, silver and absolute. Lyra stood before the assembled tribunal, no longer the invisible servant who had cowered in shadows, but the awakened Silver Moon Queen, whose very presence commanded attention. Power radiated from her skin like morning light, making even the ancient stones of the judgment hall seem to bend in acknowledgement of her authority. Seraphina knelt in silver chains that had been blessed by Elder Thorn, her golden hair matted and her blue eyes wild with the desperate fury of the defeated. Beside her, the surviving members of her conspiracy awaited their fate, their political ambitions reduced to ash by supernatural truth. You stand accused of regicide, conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against the rightful Silver Moon dynasty. Lyra's voice carried across the hall with perfect clarity. How do you answer? I regret nothing, Seraphina snarled, lifting her chin with defiant pride. The Silver Moons were abominations. Their power was too great, too dangerous. We did what was necessary to protect the natural order. By slaughtering children in their beds. By preventing chaos. Seraphina's voice cracked with the strain of maintaining her righteousness in the face of judgment. Your bloodline would have consumed everything. We saved the realm from... You saved nothing. Kyle's voice cut through her justification like a blade. You murdered innocents to steal power that was never yours to take. The trial proceeded with ancient formality, but the outcome had never been in doubt. Supernatural truth-telling made lies impossible, and the evidence of decades-long conspiracy painted a picture of calculated evil that horrified even the hardest warriors present. When the formal accusations were complete, Lyra rose from her judgment throne, power flowing around her like liquid silver. This was the moment that would define her reign, how she chose to balance justice with mercy, strength with compassion. The Silver Moon dynasty ruled for 3 centuries through wisdom, not vengeance, she said, her golden eyes fixed on the conspirators before her. We protected the weak, defended the innocent, and used our power to build rather than destroy. Hope flickered across several faces among the accused. But, Lyra continued, we also understood that some crimes demand payment in blood. The hope died. Seraphina of the Eastern Alliance, you orchestrated the murder of my parents, the suppression of my abilities, and the near destruction of the most ancient bloodline in the realm. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. For these crimes, I sentence you to exile beyond the northern borders, stripped of rank and privilege, never to return under penalty of death. Gasps rippled through the assembled crowd. Exile rather than execution, mercy that none had expected. Your co-conspirators will face trial by combat, allowing the goddess to determine their fate through strength of arms. Lyra's gaze moved to include the delegation members who had orchestrated decades of evil. Those who survive may earn redemption through service. Those who fall will find the peace they denied my family. It was justice tempered by wisdom, punishment balanced with opportunity for redemption. The mark of a ruler who remembered what it felt like to be powerless and chose to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. The combat trials lasted 3 days. Some conspirators fell to the claws and fangs of war beasts who served as champions of justice. Others surprised everyone by fighting with desperate honour, earning grudging respect and the chance to rebuild their lives in service to the crown they had tried to destroy. Through it all, Lyra presided with the steady authority of awakened royalty, her decisions guided by wisdom that seemed to flow from sources deeper than her 19 years should have allowed. On the 4th day, delegations began arriving from across the realm. Word of the Silver Moon awakening had spread like wildfire, bringing representatives from every major pack and kingdom within 1,000 miles. They came to witness the return of legend, to pledge loyalty to power that hadn't been seen in living memory, to secure alliances with the Queen who commanded every wild creature in the Northern Territories. The formal coronation took place under the full moon, in the sacred grove where Silver Moon royalty had been crowned for centuries. Ancient rituals were observed with perfect precision, every word and gesture carrying the weight of tradition that stretched back to the very founding of their civilization. Kyle knelt before her as she placed the silver circlet on his brow, accepting him as her chosen king and equal partner in the monumental task of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Their bond blazed with visible light as they exchanged vows that bound them not just as mates, but as co-rulers of a realm reborn. By moon and star, by claw and fang, by the ancient blood that flows in my veins, Lyra's voice carried across the assembled multitude, I claim my birthright as queen of the Silver Moon dynasty, protector of the wild, defender of the innocent. The response from the crowd was thunderous, voices raised in acknowledgement of authority that had been absent from the world too long. But it was the response from the forest that truly demonstrated her power. Every wild creature within 50 miles began to howl. Wolves and bears, great cats and soaring eagles, even the smallest forest dwellers added their voices to a symphony that spoke of supernatural forces aligning behind their chosen queen. As the ceremony concluded and the crowds dispersed to celebrate, Lyra found herself alone with Kyle in the sacred grove, where moonlight painted everything silver. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arms encircling her from behind, as they looked out over the kingdom that was now theirs to protect. "Only that it took so long," she replied, leaning back against his chest as their bond hummed with contentment. 19 years of being nobody when I could have been somebody all along." "You were always somebody," Kyle corrected gently. "The goddess just waited until the right moment to let the world see what I saw from the beginning." "And what was that?" "Everything." His lips found the mark on her neck where his mating bite had claimed her. "My mate, my queen, my heart." Above them, the silver moon reached its zenith, bathing the new royal pair in light that seemed to bless their union. In the distance, Fenrir's howl rose in harmony with dozens of other voices, war beasts and wild wolves joining in celebration of the reign that would reshape the world. The silver moon had risen again, and under its light the realm would flourish as it hadn't in decades. Justice had been served, love had been claimed. And the invisible girl who had spent 19 years being nobody had finally become everything she was meant to be. The coronation was complete, but the legend was just beginning. 6 months later, the Silver Moon throne room bore no resemblance to the compound where Lyra had once scrubbed beast pens in silence. Marble columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings, painted with constellations that seemed to move in the candlelight. Tapestries depicting the Silver Moon dynasty's greatest victories adorned walls where supplicants came seeking justice from a queen who remembered what it felt like to be powerless. The transformation was complete, but it was the woman seated on the ancient throne who embodied the most profound change of all. Queen Lyanna, no longer Lyra the servant, held court with the easy authority of someone born to rule, her silver hair catching light like spun moonbeams as she listened to petitions from across the realm. The invisible girl who had endured 19 years of systematic cruelty had become a sovereign whose very presence commanded respect, but her golden eyes still held the compassion that came from intimate knowledge of suffering. "The border villages report unusual peace," Kyle said, approaching her throne as the last petitioner departed. "Trade routes that haven't been safe in decades are flourishing under the protection of your wild guardians." It was true. Word of the Silver Moon awakening had spread far beyond their territory, and with it came something unprecedented, voluntary cooperation from every wild creature in the northern reaches. Merchant caravans travelled under the protection of wolf packs who materialised from the forest whenever bandits threatened. Mountain passes thought impassable were suddenly safe under the watchful eyes of great bears who answered to no master except the queen whose power spoke to their deepest instincts. "The goddess gave us this gift for a purpose," Lyra replied, rising from her throne to join him at the great windows overlooking their kingdom. Protection of the innocent was always the Silver Moon creed. Through the glass she could see the sprawling capital that had grown around their palace, a city where former servants worked alongside displaced nobility, where worth was measured in character rather than bloodline. It was the world she had dreamed of during those long years of invisibility, where power served justice instead of ambition. "Any word from the southern kingdoms?" she asked, though her enhanced senses had already detected the messenger's approach through the bond she shared with every wild creature in their territory. "The delegation from the desert clans requests an audience," Kyle confirmed. "They're offering an alliance based on mutual protection rather than political marriage. It seems your reputation for fairness has spread farther than we thought." Lyra smiled, remembering a time when the very idea of political recognition would have seemed impossible. Now kingdoms competed for her favour, not because they feared her power, but because they respected her wisdom. The great doors opened to admit Elder Thorn, his weathered face bright with satisfaction as he carried a leather-bound volume toward them. "The histories are complete, Your Majesty," he said, offering her the book with reverent hands. "Every crime of the conspiracy documented, every murdered bloodline member honoured, every truth preserved for future generations." Lyra accepted the tome, with hands that no longer trembled, feeling the weight of vindicated justice in the carefully recorded pages. Her family's story would not be forgotten. The Silver Moon legacy would endure not through vengeance, but through the better world their sacrifice had ultimately created. "There's something else," Thorn continued, his pale eyes twinkling with barely contained joy. "Something the ancient text suggested, but we dared not hope for." "What is it?" Kyle asked, though his enhanced bond with Lyra was already carrying whispers of extraordinary news. "The heir," Thorn said simply. "The Silver Moon bloodline continues." The words hit Lyra with the force of prophecy fulfilled. Her hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, where supernatural senses confirmed what mortal awareness had not yet detected. New life growing within her, carrying the combined heritage of Silver Moon royalty and Alpha King strength. "A child," Kyle breathed, wonder and fierce protectiveness flooding through their bond. "Our child." "The next generation," Lyra corrected, her voice carrying the weight of dynasty renewed. "The proof that love conquers politics, that truth survives conspiracy, that some things are too powerful to be destroyed by those who fear them." Through the windows, evening painted the sky in shades of silver and gold. Somewhere in the distance, Fenrir's howl rose in celebration, followed by the voices of hundreds of war beasts and wild creatures who sensed their queen's joy through bonds deeper than conscious thought. That night, alone in their private chambers, Lyra stood on the balcony where she had once imagined watching the world that had rejected her. Now that same world looked up to her palace with hope instead of dismissal, seeking guidance from a queen who understood both powerlessness and strength. "Do you ever think about who you might have been if they hadn't suppressed your wolf?" Kyle asked, joining her at the marble railing where moonlight turned everything sacred. "Every day," she admitted. "But then I remember that every moment of suffering taught me something about leadership that comfort never could have. I know what it feels like to be invisible, so I see those others overlook. I know what it means to be called worthless, so I recognize worth wherever it hides." "The perfect queen," he said, his arms encircling her from behind as their bond hummed with contentment. "The queen who was meant to be," she corrected, "forged by adversity, strengthened by love, crowned by justice rather than birthright alone." Their child stirred within her, too small to be felt but present in every enhanced sense she possessed. The Silver Moon bloodline would continue, carried forward by parents who had chosen each other against impossible odds and built a kingdom on foundations of mutual respect rather than fear. "I love you," Kyle said against her ear, the words carrying all the weight of recognition that had begun the day Fenrir bowed before a servant girl. "I love you too," she replied, turning in his arms to face the man who had seen her worth when the entire world declared her worthless. Above them, the silver moon reached its zenith, bathing the royal pair in light that blessed their union and the child they carried. In the distance, the contented sounds of a peaceful kingdom drifted through the night air, a symphony of prosperity built on foundations of justice and protected by powers older than memory. The invisible girl was gone forever, replaced by a queen whose light would shine for generations to come. The silver moon had risen, and under its guidance, the realm would flourish as it hadn't in centuries. Some stories end with crowns claimed and enemies defeated, but the best stories end with love acknowledged, wisdom earned, and the promise that tomorrow will be better than yesterday. And in the silver moonlight that painted everything with the glow of new beginnings, Queen Lyanna and King Cale faced that tomorrow together, their bond unbreakable and their legacy assured. The earth trembled before he arrived. Lyra felt it in her bones first, a vibration that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than the ground beneath her feet. The war beasts in their pens grew restless, whining and pacing as something ancient and primal approached their territory. Storm pressed against the bars of his enclosure, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon where dust clouds announced the arrival of the most powerful alpha in the known world, Alpha King Kyle. The pack assembled in the great courtyard like pieces on a chessboard, each positioned according to their rank and value. Beta Marcus stood at the forefront with his mate, their daughter Seraphina arranged like a perfect offering in silk the colour of moonlight. Her golden hair caught the morning sun, and her posture spoke of confidence born from a lifetime of knowing exactly what she was worth. Lyra crouched behind the beast pens, invisible as always, clutching a bucket of cleaning supplies that gave her excuse to exist in this space. She had been ordered to remain out of sight during the ceremony, but the compound's layout made complete avoidance impossible. From her position, she could see everything while being seen by no one. That had always been her gift, invisibility. The ground shook harder now, and the war beasts began to howl, not in fear, but in recognition. Something was coming that spoke to the deepest parts of their wild souls, something that made their ancient blood sing with acknowledgement. Then he appeared. Alpha King Kyle rode at the head of a small but formidable entourage, his presence hitting the assembled pack like a physical force. Even from a distance, Lyra could feel the weight of his authority pressing down on everything in his path. Wolves began dropping to their knees in automatic submission, their bodies responding to his dominance before their minds could catch up. He was larger than she had expected, broad-shouldered and moving with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known defeat. Dark hair caught the wind, and even from her hiding place she could see the silver threading through his temples that spoke of battles survived and wisdom earned through blood. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air itself seem to bend around his presence. But it was what followed him that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. Fenrir emerged from the dust like a creature born from nightmares and legend. The war beast was massive, easily twice the size of the pack's largest wolves, his fur black as starless nights and scarred from countless battles. Golden eyes swept the assembled crowd with the cold assessment of a killer, and when he moved, it was with the controlled violence of a storm held temporarily in check. He had never bowed to anyone except his alpha. The stories said he was more demon than wolf, forged in the fires of war and baptized in the blood of enemies. Looking at him now, Lyra believed every word. The formal presentations began with practiced precision. Beta Marcus stepped forward with words of welcome and submission, offering the pack's finest warriors for inspection. Young males displayed their strength through brief shifts and combat demonstrations, their wolves impressive, but somehow diminished in the presence of true royalty. Then came the females. Seraphina glided forward like a goddess descending from Mount Olympus, her wolf a magnificent golden creature that drew admiring murmurs from the assembled crowd. She was everything an alpha king could want in a mate, beautiful, powerful, politically connected, and bred for the sole purpose of strengthening bloodlines. Lyra watched from the shadows as Seraphina performed the traditional greeting, her submission elegant and perfectly calculated to demonstrate both respect and desirability. The political implications were obvious to everyone present. An alliance between Kyle's kingdom and their pack would secure territory, resources, and military strength for generations. It was a logical match, a perfect match. So why was Kyle's wolf becoming increasingly agitated? Lyra could see it in the tension gathering across his shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the compound as if searching for something that should be there but wasn't. Fenrir had grown restless too, his massive head turning toward the beast pens with an intensity that made the other war beasts whine and press against their enclosure walls. "Your Majesty," Beta Marcus was saying, "we offer our finest warriors and our most suitable females for your consideration. Our bloodlines run pure, our loyalty runs deep, and our territory offers strategic advantages that—" Fenrir's howl cut through the speech like a blade through silk. The sound was unlike anything Lyra had ever heard, wild and mournful and filled with a longing that made her chest ache in sympathy. Every war beast in the compound answered his call, their voices rising in a chorus that spoke of ancient bonds and supernatural recognition. Kyle's hand went to his wolf's massive head, his voice too low to carry, but his posture suggesting he was trying to calm the agitated beast. But Fenrir would not be soothed. His golden eyes had found something in the direction of the beast pens, and nothing else in the world seemed to matter. "Perhaps," Seraphina said with practised grace, "Fenrir senses the quality of our war beasts. Our bloodlines have always produced exceptional—" Her words died as Fenrir broke away from his alpha's side. The massive war beast moved with deadly purpose toward the beast pens, his focus laser-sharp and unshakable. Pack members scattered from his path, fear overriding protocol as several 100 pounds of legendary predator stalked through their ranks. Lyra pressed herself against the back wall of Storm's pen, her heart hammering against her ribs. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The bucket fell from her nerveless fingers, clanging against the ground in the sudden silence that had fallen over the compound. Fenrir was coming straight for her. The war beast's eyes found hers through the fence slats, and something passed between them that she couldn't name. Recognition, understanding, a connection that defied every law she had ever been taught about pack hierarchy and supernatural bonds. Behind him, she could hear Kyle's voice raised in command, the Alpha King moving to control his war beast before disaster struck. But Fenrir paid no attention to anything except the invisible girl cowering behind the war beast pens. Everything changed when their eyes met. Lyra felt something deep in her chest shift, like a lock turning or a door opening after years of being sealed shut. Her wolf, silent for 19 years, stirred for the first time in her life. And Fenrir, the legendary war beast who had never bowed to anyone except the Alpha King himself, stopped in his tracks and stared at her like he had found something he had been searching for his entire life. Fenrir moved through the compound like death itself had taken wolf form. Pack members fled before him, their survival instincts overriding years of training as several 100 pounds of legendary predator stalked toward the beast pens with unwavering purpose. His golden eyes never left Lyra's face, and in their depths she saw something that made her newly awakened wolf whimper in recognition. He knew what she was before she did. Lyra pressed herself against the back wall of Storm's enclosure, trapped between wooden slats and the approaching war beast, whose reputation had been built on the bones of his enemies. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The bucket of cleaning supplies lay forgotten at her feet, her hands trembling as she watched her death approach on silent paws. "Fenrir, heal!" Kyle's command cracked across the compound like a whip, carrying all the authority of an Alpha King who had never been disobeyed. The war beast didn't even slow down. Terror and confusion rippled through the assembled pack as they witnessed the impossible. Fenrir ignoring a direct order from the only being he had ever submitted to. Whispers began, then died as the massive wolf reached the fence that separated him from the cowering servant girl. Lyra looked into those ancient golden eyes and saw her death reflected there. This was how it would end, not in the slow invisibility she had grown accustomed to, but in violent spectacle before the most powerful alpha in the known world. At least it would be quick. She closed her eyes and waited. The compound fell into absolute silence. When nothing happened, Lyra opened her eyes to find Fenrir's massive head lowered, his body pressed against the ground in a posture she had only ever seen him take before his Alpha King. The legendary warbeast, terror of battlefields and nightmare of enemy packs, had dropped into a perfect bow before a servant girl who had never even shifted. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "Impossible," someone whispered. "She's nobody," another voice breathed. "What is he doing?" Lyra stared down at the enormous creature prostrated before her, his scarred head nearly touching her feet through the fence slats. This close, she could see the silver threading through his black fur, could smell the wild scent of deep forests and ancient magic that clung to his coat. He was magnificent and terrible and completely, utterly submissive to her in a way that defied every law of nature she had ever been taught. "Get up," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, get up." But Fenrir remained motionless, waiting. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through her paralysis. Alpha King Kyle moved toward them with controlled urgency, his power preceding him like a storm front. The assembled pack parted before him, their submission automatic and absolute, but his attention was focused entirely on the impossible tableau before the beast pens. "What did you do?" His voice was deadly quiet as he reached the fence, his silver eyes moving between Lyra and his prostrated war beast. "Nothing," Lyra managed, the word barely a breath. "I didn't do anything. I was just cleaning and he—" "Nobody can command Fenrir except me." Kyle's statement was flat, absolute. He has never bowed to another living soul. "I didn't command him," Lyra said quickly, desperation making her voice stronger. "I don't know why I can't even shift. I'm nobody. I'm nothing." Something flickered across Kyle's face at her words, too quick to identify. His gaze swept over her with the assessment of a predator, taking in her servant's clothing, her position among the cleaning supplies, her obvious terror. She was everything he had been taught to dismiss, powerless, wolfless, beneath notice. So why was his own wolf going insane in his chest? "Stand!" Kyle commanded his warbeast. Fenrir's ears flicked, but he didn't move. His submission to the girl remained absolute, unshakable. The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "Fenrir, stand!" Still nothing. The warbeast might as well have been carved from stone, his devotion to Lyra overriding every bond he had ever known. Seraphina's voice cut through the tension like poisoned silk. "Your Majesty, surely this is some kind of aberration, a fluke of scent, or be silent." Kyle's words carried enough force to make the Beta's daughter step back, her perfect composure cracking for just a moment. He turned back to Lyra, and she saw something in his silver eyes that made her breath catch. Recognition. The same impossible knowing that had passed between her and Fenrir, but deeper, more complex, more dangerous. "What is your name?" His voice had gentled, though the authority remained. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra." He repeated it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "How long have you worked with the warbeasts?" "All my life. They trust me. I don't know why." Behind him, she could see the pack watching with mixture of horror and fascination. This wasn't how these ceremonies were supposed to go. Alpha Kings didn't have conversations with servant girls while their legendary war beasts bowed at nobody's feet. "Show me," Kyle said suddenly. "What?" "Show me why they trust you." Lyra's hands shook as she unlatched the gate to Storm's pen. The grey warbeast immediately moved to her side, pressing his massive head against her shoulder in a gesture of affection that drew gasps from the watching crowd. She ran her fingers through his fur, and he leaned into her touch with obvious contentment. "They know I won't hurt them," she said quietly. I think they can sense it somehow, that I understand what it's like to be... To be what? Forgotten, overlooked, treated as less than you are." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth that neither had expected her to voice. Cale's eyes never left her face as she demonstrated her connection with Storm, showing the natural ease that had mystified handlers for years. When she finally looked up, she found the Alpha King studying her with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Impossible," he murmured, but not like the others had said it, like he was recognizing something he had been searching for without knowing it. His wolf was calling to hers, and for the first time in 19 years, Lyra felt an answering stir deep in her chest. Not a full awakening, not yet, but something profound and terrifying and completely beyond her understanding. "Mate." The word echoed in her head, and she didn't know if it came from her barely awakened wolf, or from some ancient presence examining her, or from the Alpha King whose silver eyes had gone wide with shock. Fenrir finally raised his head and looked between them, his golden eyes holding satisfaction that looked almost like smugness. And the pack said nothing at all. The moon had barely set when Kyle found her. Lyra knelt beside the eastern stream, her hands submerged in the icy water as she tried to wash away the trembling that had plagued her since yesterday's impossible ceremony. Sleep had been a stranger, her mind replaying the moment when Fenrir had bowed before her, when the Alpha King's silver eyes had widened with recognition that made no sense. Mate. The word haunted her like a curse she couldn't break. "You're awake early." His voice carried across the dawn silence, deep and controlled, but carrying an edge she couldn't identify. Lyra's hands stilled in the water. She had hoped for more time before facing the consequences of whatever had happened between them. "I couldn't sleep, Your Majesty." "Neither could I." He moved closer, and she could feel the weight of his presence like a physical thing pressing against her spine. "My wolf has been restless." She didn't turn around. Couldn't. The memory of his eyes during that moment of recognition burned too brightly in her mind. "I'm sorry if I caused problems with the ceremony. I never meant for—" "Look at me." The command was gentle but absolute. Lyra slowly rose and faced him, water dripping from her fingertips like liquid diamonds in the early light. This close, she could see the exhaustion etched around his silver eyes, the tension gathered in his shoulders like a storm preparing to break. "Tell me what you are," he said. "Nothing." The answer came automatically, worn smooth by years of repetition. "I'm nobody, just a servant who—" "My war beast doesn't bow to servants." His words cut through her rehearsed dismissal like a blade. "Fenrir has never submitted to another soul except me. Yesterday, he wouldn't obey a direct command because he was too busy prostrating himself before you." Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warming air. "I don't understand it either." "And my wolf." Kyle stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the wild scent that clung to his skin. "My wolf recognized you, claimed you. Do you know what that means?" Her chest ached with something she didn't have words for. "It means there's been a mistake." "Has there?" His silver eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Because standing here now, looking at you, everything in me is screaming that you belong to me." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, shaking her head. "That's impossible. You're the Alpha King. I'm nothing. I can't even shift." "Show me." "What?" "Try to shift, here, now." Lyra stared at him in horror. "I can't. I've never been able to—" "Try." The command carried alpha authority that made her wolf stir uneasily in her chest. She had attempted shifting countless times over the years, always failing, always proving her worthlessness to anyone watching. But something was different now. Something had awakened yesterday when Fenrir bowed before her. She closed her eyes and reached for the wolf that had been silent her entire life. Pain lanced through her bones, sharp and sudden. Her spine arched as something deep inside her struggled against barriers she hadn't known existed. For a moment, just a moment, she felt fur trying to break through her skin, felt her face wanting to elongate, felt power coursing through her veins like liquid fire. Then the barriers snapped back into place and she collapsed to her knees, gasping. Kyle was beside her instantly, his hands steadying her shoulders. "What did you feel?" "Pain," she whispered, like something was trapped, like something was fighting to get out but couldn't. His grip tightened. "Someone suppressed your wolf." "That's not possible." "It's not only possible, it's the only explanation." His voice carried deadly certainty. "Someone powerful enough to bind a wolf's spirit did this to you. The question is why?" Before she could respond, voices carried across the compound. Pack members beginning their morning routines, the normal rhythms of life resuming despite yesterday's upheaval. Kyle's hands dropped from her shoulders, and the loss of contact felt like a wound. "This stays between us," he said quietly. "Your Majesty." "My name is Kyle." The correction was firm. "And you will call me by it when we're alone." Alone. As if there would be other times, other stolen moments at dawn, by streams that ran cold with mountain water. The thought made her chest tight with dangerous hope. "The pack expects you to choose Seraphina," Lyra said, forcing herself to voice the reality that stood between them. "She's perfect for you, beautiful, powerful, politically connected. She's not my mate." The words hung in the morning air like a declaration of war against everything logical and sensible and politically necessary. "But I could be wrong," she whispered. "This could be some kind of mistake, or—" "Look at me." His hand cupped her chin, tilting her face up until she met his silver gaze. "Tell me you don't feel it. The pull, the recognition. Tell me your wolf didn't stir when mine called to it." She couldn't. Standing this close to him, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, every cell in her body was screaming recognition. Mine. The thought came from a place deeper than conscious desire, older than logic. "It doesn't matter what I feel," she said instead. "You have duties, responsibilities. Your kingdom needs the alliance that Seraphina's family can provide." "And what about what I need?" The question was raw, vulnerable in a way that didn't match the controlled Alpha King she had witnessed yesterday. This was Kale, the man, not the monarch, and seeing him like this made her heart ache with longing she had no right to feel. "You need to do what's right for your people," she said, each word tearing at her throat. "Even if it destroys me?" Even then. He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw the exact moment when the Alpha King reasserted control over the man. His expression closed off, became distant and formal despite the intimacy of their position. "Report to the War Beast compound after morning meal," he said, stepping back. "You'll work directly with Fenrir during my stay." It was a dismissal and a gift wrapped in the same command. More time in his presence, more opportunities for this impossible thing between them to grow stronger and more dangerous. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Kyle," he corrected automatically, then seemed to regret it. "In public, you will address me properly." She nodded, understanding the boundaries even as every part of her rebelled against them. He was an Alpha King, with a kingdom to protect and alliances to forge. She was nobody, with nothing to offer except a connection that defied every law they both knew. As he walked away, Lyra pressed her hand to her chest where something ached like a wound that wouldn't heal. Her wolf stirred restlessly, calling out to its mate with increasing desperation. But some bonds were too dangerous to acknowledge, even when they felt as inevitable as sunrise, even when denying them might destroy them both. Elder Thorne's weathered hands trembled as he turned the ancient pages. "Silver moon," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of secrets that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. "By the goddess, it's true." Lyra sat across from him in the temple's shadowed alcove, her heart hammering against her ribs as dusty records revealed truths that rewrote everything she had believed about herself. The elder's pale eyes kept moving between the faded text and her face, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "The royal family was murdered 19 years ago," Thorne continued, his finger tracing lines of carefully preserved script. "Alpha King Marcus of the Silver Moon dynasty, his mate Queen Elena, and their infant daughter Lyanna. The attack came at night. No survivors were found." "Then this can't be about me," Lyra said quickly. "My name is Lyra, not Lyanna, and I'm not—" "Names can be changed to protect the innocent," Thorne interrupted gently. "And look here." He turned the book toward her, pointing to an illustration that made her blood run cold. The drawing showed a woman with silver hair and golden eyes, her wolf form magnificent and gleaming like moonlight on water. Beneath the image, elegant script proclaimed her Queen Elena of the Silver Moon, blessed by the goddess with the rarest of gifts. Lyra stared at her own face, looking back at her from the centuries-old page. "The Silver Moon bloodline carries power that hasn't been seen in over 300 years, Thorne explained. "They could command any wolf, could heal with touch, could see truth through lies. Their very presence could calm the wildest beast or inspire the meekest heart to courage." "But I can't even shift," Lyra protested, even as pieces began clicking into place with horrible clarity. Her connection with the war beasts, the way Storm always calmed under her touch, Fenrir's inexplicable submission. "Because your wolf was bound," Thorne said with certainty. "Someone powerful enough to suppress royal blood did this to you, child. The question is who and why they chose to hide you rather than complete the massacre." Before Lyra could respond, footsteps echoed through the temple's main hall. She turned to find Seraphina approaching with her usual graceful confidence, but something cold glittered in her blue eyes that hadn't been there before. "Lyra!" Seraphina's voice was honey over steel. "How fascinating to find you here, buried in dusty old books. Surely someone of your station has better ways to spend her time." Elder Thorne quickly closed the ancient text, but not quickly enough. Seraphina's sharp gaze caught the motion, and her smile turned predatory. "Ancient histories can be so dangerous," she continued, moving closer, "full of wild stories and impossible claims. Sometimes it's better to let the dead stay buried, don't you think?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Lyra felt something stir in her chest, her suppressed wolf responding to the challenge with surprising heat. "I should return to my duties," Lyra said, standing carefully. "Yes, you should." Seraphina's smile never wavered. "After all, the Alpha King has been asking for you. Something about working with that beast of his. Such an honor for someone in your position." The way she said honor made it sound like a death sentence. Lyra left the temple with Elder Thorne's revelations burning in her mind and Seraphina's threat echoing in her ears. Silver Moon royalty, suppressed bloodline, power that could command any wolf. It was impossible, insane, everything she had been taught about herself turned upside down. But as she walked toward the war beast compound, she felt something she had never experienced before. Her wolf was stirring, pushing against the barriers that had held it captive for 19 years. Each step brought her closer to Kale, and each step made those barriers weaker. She found him in Fenrir's enclosure, his hands moving over the massive war beast with practiced care. The sight of them together, Alpha King and legendary warrior, should have intimidated her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "You're late," Kyle said without turning around. "I was in the temple, with Elder Thorne." His hand stilled on Fenrir's fur. "What did you learn?" She told him everything: the Silver Moon dynasty, the murdered royal family, the illustrated queen whose face matched her own. With each revelation, Kyle's expression grew darker, more dangerous. "Someone suppressed the blood of the most powerful dynasty in recorded history," he said when she finished. "They murdered your family but kept you alive as a servant. Why?" "Maybe they wanted me to suffer," Lyra said quietly. "Maybe death would have been too merciful." "No." Kyle's voice carried deadly certainty. "If they wanted you to suffer, they wouldn't have hidden your identity so carefully. This was strategic. Someone needed you alive, but powerless." Before she could ask what he meant, pain lanced through her chest. Not physical pain, something deeper, more fundamental. The bond between them was pulling taut, golden threads stretching thin as political reality crashed against supernatural truth. "The delegation from Seraphina's family arrives tomorrow," Kyle said, his voice carefully controlled. "They'll expect a formal betrothal announcement within 3 days." "Then you should give them one." He turned to face her then, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Should I? Should I bind myself to someone who isn't my mate while my true mate stands before me carrying the bloodline of legends?" "Yes," she whispered, even as the word tore at her throat, "because your kingdom needs the alliance more than you need me." "What if I can't?" The question was raw, vulnerable. What if trying to deny this bond destroys us both? Before she could answer, Fenrir moved between them with deliberate intent. The massive war beast looked from Kyle to Lyra and back again, his golden eyes holding intelligence that bordered on human understanding. Then he did something that made them both freeze. Fenrir placed one massive paw on Kyle's chest and the other on Lyra's, connecting them in a bridge of fur and muscle and ancient wisdom. Power flowed through the connection, not Kyle's dominance or Lyra's suppressed abilities, but something older, something that recognized the truth their human minds were struggling to accept. The barriers around Lyra's wolf cracked just a little more. "He knows what we are to each other," Kyle said softly, "even if we're too afraid to admit it." "I'm not afraid of admitting it," Lyra replied. "I'm afraid of what happens when we do." Thunder rumbled overhead as storm clouds gathered, and in the distance she could hear the approach of horses carrying political delegates who would expect their Alpha King to choose duty over love. But standing there with Fenrir's massive paws connecting her to her mate, Lyra felt her wolf stir with increasing desperation. The Silver Moon bloodline might be suppressed, but it wasn't gone. And with each passing moment, the barriers holding it back grew weaker. Soon she would have to choose between remaining hidden and claiming what was rightfully hers, even if that choice destroyed them both. The infirmary smelled of herbs and antiseptic, but nothing could mask the scent of blood that had soaked into Lyra's hair. She lay unconscious on the narrow cot, her breathing shallow and laboured, while Kyle paced the small room like a caged predator. The gash across her temple had required 12 stitches, and the healer had muttered about concussions and internal injuries that could manifest later, all from a training accident that had been anything but accidental. "The beam was meant to fall," Kyle said for the 3rd time, his voice deadly quiet. "Someone loosened the support bolts." Beta Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the corner, his political instincts warring with the evidence before them. "Your Majesty, surely you don't think anyone in our pack would deliberately—" "I think," Kyle interrupted, "that my mate nearly died while working with the war beasts, and the timing is remarkably convenient." The word mate hung in the air like a confession. Marcus's eyes widened, but he was smart enough to keep his shock silent. Thunder rumbled overhead as the afternoon storm broke, rain hammering against the infirmary windows. Each drop seemed to echo the rhythm of Lyra's heartbeat, steady but fragile, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Kyle approached the cot and carefully smoothed a strand of silver hair away from her bandaged temple. The moment his skin touched hers, something extraordinary happened. The bond between them flared to life. Golden threads of connection that had been strained by denial suddenly blazing with shared sensation. He could feel her pain, her confusion, the way her suppressed wolf was fighting harder against its bindings, using the trauma as fuel to break free. "She's changing," he said softly. Marcus stepped closer, peering at Lyra's unconscious form. "What do you mean?" "Her wolf is getting stronger. I can feel it through our bond." Kyle's fingers traced the air above her face, not quite touching but close enough to sense the power building beneath her skin. Someone tried to kill her because they knew this was happening. "But she's just a servant. She's the last of the Silver Moon bloodline." The words fell into silence, broken only by rain and Lyra's steady breathing. Marcus stared at Kyle as if he had declared the moon was falling from the sky. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "The silver moons were wiped out 19 years ago. Yet here she lies, carrying their power in her blood, while someone systematically tried to destroy her." Kyle's voice carried enough authority to end all argument. "Elder Thorn found the records. The resemblance is undeniable." Before Marcus could respond, Lyra stirred on the cot. Her golden eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, but alive. Relief crashed through Kyle with enough force to make him sway. "Kyle?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." He took her hand without thinking, their bond settling into warmth and comfort the moment their skin connected. "What happened? I remember working with the training equipment and then—" Her free hand went to her bandaged temple, wincing at the contact. "Someone tried to kill you," Kyle said bluntly. "The support beam was sabotaged." Fear flickered across her face, quickly replaced by resignation that made his chest ache. "Of course it was. I should have expected—" "No." His grip on her hand tightened. "You should have expected my protection. You should have expected me to hunt down whoever dared harm my mate." The words sent visible shivers through her, and he could feel her wolf responding to his claim. The barriers around her suppressed abilities were cracking like ice in spring, hairline fractures that would soon become breaks. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "the delegation from Seraphina's family will arrive within hours. They'll expect to discuss the betrothal." "There will be no betrothal." Kyle's declaration was flat, final. "Not with Seraphina, not with anyone except my true mate. But the alliance can be negotiated another way." Kyle turned his silver gaze on the beta, and Marcus took an involuntary step backward. "Unless you prefer to explain to them why their daughter orchestrated an assassination attempt on the future queen." Lyra struggled to sit up, her movements still unsteady. "Kyle, you can't. Your kingdom needs—" "My kingdom needs a queen who can command the loyalty of our war beasts, who carries the most powerful bloodline in recorded history, who was born to rule." His voice gentled as he cupped her face in his free hand. "My kingdom needs you." "I'm nobody," she whispered, the old refrain automatic, despite everything they had discovered. "You're my mate. You're Silver Moon royalty. You're the woman my war beast bowed before because he recognized what you are even when you didn't." Kyle's thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "You are everything." Through the bond, he felt her wolf surge against its prison with desperate hunger. The assassination attempt had triggered something primal in her suppressed abilities, a survival instinct that was systematically dismantling 19 years of magical binding. "I can feel your wolf," he said softly. "She's fighting to reach you." "It hurts," Lyra admitted, pressing her hand to her chest where something ached like a wound trying to heal. "Like something inside me is trying to break free." "Then let it." His voice carried alpha command, mixed with gentle encouragement. "Stop fighting what you are." "I'm scared." "I know, but I'm here, and I'm not letting you go through this alone." Outside, lightning split the sky, and in its brilliant flash Lyra's eyes flickered silver for just a moment. Power rippled through the room, making the war beasts in the distant compound howl in recognition. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his wolf submitting automatically to the authority bleeding from Lyra's barely controlled transformation. "The delegation," he stammered. "What do I tell them?" Kyle never took his eyes off Lyra as she struggled with the awakening power in her blood. "Tell them the Alpha King has found his true mate. Tell them the Silver Moon bloodline has returned. Tell them anything you like." Another surge of power, stronger this time. Lyra's breathing hitched as her suppressed wolf pushed harder against the weakening barriers. "But make sure they understand," Kyle continued, his voice carrying deadly promise, "that anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally." The bond between them flared brighter as Lyra's transformation accelerated, golden threads binding them together with increasing strength. Soon there would be no hiding what she was, no pretending the mate bond could be denied, no political convenience that could override supernatural truth. The storm raged outside, but inside the infirmary something far more powerful was awakening, and nothing would ever be the same. The arrow meant for Cale's heart found Lyra's shoulder instead. She had moved without thinking, her body responding to danger before her mind could process the threat. One moment she was walking beside him through the forest, where they had sought privacy from the political chaos consuming the compound. The next, silver-tipped death was flying toward the Alpha King's chest, and something primal in her blood screamed protect. The impact sent her sprawling, pain exploding through her shoulder as the arrow buried itself deep in muscle and bone. But pain was nothing compared to the rage that erupted from somewhere she hadn't known existed. Her wolf didn't just stir, it roared. Power detonated through her body like lightning seeking ground. The barriers that had held her abilities captive for 19 years didn't crack, they shattered. Ancient magic flooded her veins, silver fire that burned away every lie she had ever been told about her worth. Lyra's scream became a howl that shook the very foundations of the forest. Her bones cracked and reformed with sounds like breaking thunder. Her spine elongated, her face pushed forward into a muzzle. Her hands became claws that could tear through steel. But this wasn't the painful, clumsy first shift that most wolves experienced. This was the awakening of royalty. Silver fur erupted across her transforming body, gleaming like moonlight on water. Her wolf was massive, easily matching the war beasts in size, with eyes that blazed gold and carried the wisdom of ancient bloodlines. Power radiated from her in waves that made the very air shimmer. The assassin, hidden in the trees above them, made the mistake of notching a second arrow. Lyra moved with speed that defied physics, her newly awakened abilities turning her into liquid silver death. She bounded up the massive oak trunk as if gravity were merely a suggestion, her claws finding purchase in bark that should have been too hard to penetrate. The assassin's scream cut short as she reached him. She landed on the forest floor in human form, naked and trembling but whole, her shoulder already healing with supernatural speed. The arrow lay forgotten in the grass, and in the tree above them nothing remained but claw marks scored deep into the wood. Kyle stared at her with something approaching awe. "Silver Moon," he breathed. "By the goddess, you're magnificent." Lyra looked down at her hands, still tingling with residual power. The wolf that had been silent her entire life now paced restlessly in her chest, no longer caged, no longer suppressed. She could feel its strength, its ancient authority, its bone-deep certainty of what it was. "I killed him," she said, the words strange in her mouth. "You protected your mate," Cale corrected, moving to wrap his cloak around her bare shoulders. "You did exactly what any wolf would do when their alpha was threatened. But I've never killed anything before. I've never even harmed. You've never had access to your true nature before." His hands were gentle as he drew the cloak closed, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers. The Silver Moon wolves were legendary warriors, Lyra. Protection of their mates and pack was sacred to them. She felt the truth of it resonating in her bones. The assassin had threatened Kyle, and her wolf had responded with lethal efficiency. There was no guilt in the action, only rightness, only the satisfaction of a predator who had defended what belonged to them. "Someone hired him," she said, her enhanced senses picking up traces of foreign scent on the wind. This wasn't random. No, it wasn't. Kyle's voice carried deadly promise. Someone knew we would seek privacy in the forest. Someone knew exactly when and where to position their killer. They made their way back to the compound in tense silence, Lyra's new awareness cataloguing every sound, every scent, every potential threat with supernatural precision. The world looked different through royal eyes, sharper, more vivid, full of details she had never noticed before. The pack's reaction to her transformation was immediate and instinctive. Wolves who had dismissed her as worthless now dropped their gazes in automatic submission. Her power preceded her like a physical force, making even the strongest warriors step aside without conscious thought. But it was the war beast's response that truly drove home what she had become. Every single one of them pressed against their enclosure walls as she passed, whining and howling in recognition. Storm actually broke free of his pen, padding over to press his massive head against her leg in homage. Even the most aggressive fighters among them, beasts that only responded to Kyle's alpha command, treated her with reverence that bordered on worship. "They know what you are," Kyle said softly. "What you've always been, even when you didn't." Elder Thorne appeared at her other side, his weathered face bright with wonder. "The Silver Moon Queen walks among us again," he said, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy fulfilled. "The bloodline has awakened." "Someone tried to prevent that awakening," Lyra said, her new wolf analysing the attack with clinical precision. "The timing wasn't coincidental. They knew I was close to transformation." "Which means," Kyle added grimly, "we have enemies among those closest to us." As if summoned by his words, Seraphina appeared in the compound's main courtyard, surrounded by her family's delegation and wearing an expression of shock that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Goddess, preserve us," she said, her voice pitched to carry across the gathered crowd. "What happened? We heard the most terrible howling, and then rumours that there was an attack." She stopped speaking as her gaze fell on Lyra, taking in the silver hair that now gleamed with supernatural light, the golden eyes that held ancient authority, the way every wolf in sight was showing submission to someone who had been invisible just hours before. "Impossible," Seraphina breathed. "Nothing is impossible when the goddess wills it," Elder Thorne replied, his voice carrying clear challenge. But Lyra was watching Seraphina's family delegation, her enhanced senses reading micro-expressions and scent signatures that told a different story than their shocked faces suggested. She could smell the satisfaction hidden beneath their dismay, could see the calculation behind their wide eyes. "You knew," she said quietly, but her voice carried across the courtyard with supernatural clarity. "You knew what I was, and you tried to stop it." The accusation hung in the air like a blade suspended over their heads. Several delegation members exchanged glances that confirmed everything Lyra's awakened instincts were telling her. "That's a serious charge," Beta Marcus said carefully. "It's the truth," Lyra replied, her wolf's certainty absolute. "I can smell the lies on them. I can see the guilt in their eyes. They orchestrated both attacks, hoping to kill me before I could complete my awakening." Kyle stepped beside her, his presence combining with hers to create a wall of alpha authority that made every wolf present tremble. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice carrying enough command to compel honesty from anyone with wolf blood. The delegation's leader, Seraphina's uncle, tried to maintain his composure, but sweat beaded his forehead as the Alpha King's power pressed against his mind. "The Silver Moon bloodline was destroyed for good reason," he said finally. "They were too powerful, too dangerous. Their very existence threatened the natural order." "So you murdered children," Lyra said, her voice deadly quiet. You slaughtered an entire royal line to protect your own political ambitions. We protected the realm from chaos, he replied, lifting his chin with defiant pride, and we would do it again. The compound erupted in snarls and threatening postures as the pack processed this confession. But before violence could break loose, Lyra's voice cut through the chaos with supernatural authority. Enough! Every wolf fell silent instantly, responding to a power they had never encountered before, but recognized in their very bones. Silver light seemed to emanate from her skin as she faced down the conspirators who had destroyed her family and stolen her childhood. You wanted to prevent the Silver Moon bloodline from awakening, she said, her words carrying across the compound like a royal decree. You failed. And as if to emphasize her point, every war beast in the compound howled in perfect unison, their voices rising to the storm-darkened sky in acknowledgement of their true queen. The evidence burned in Kyle's hands like liquid fire. Letters written in Seraphina's delicate script, detailing payments to assassins and plans to eliminate the Pretender before she could claim her birthright. Bank records showing gold flowing from her family's coffers to known killers, witness testimony from servants who had overheard conversations about finishing what was started 19 years ago. They killed my parents, Lyra said, her voice eerily calm as she read the documents spread across the war room table. They murdered the Alpha King and Queen of the Silver Moon dynasty in their own bed, then hunted down every remaining bloodline member like animals. All except one, Kale corrected grimly. They kept you alive for a reason. Elder Thorne looked up from the ancient text he had been consulting, his weathered face grave. According to the old laws, the Silver Moon bloodline held treaty rights that couldn't be dissolved without direct heir consent. As long as you lived, even as a suppressed servant, those treaties remained binding. What treaties? Lyra asked, though her awakened instincts already whispered the answer. Territory rights, mining claims, water access that feeds 3 major rivers. Thorne's finger traced lines on a faded map. The Silver Moon lands were the most strategically valuable in the realm. Your family's death transferred those rights to the crown, but your survival as rightful heir could reclaim them. So they kept me powerless and ignorant, Lyra said, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Alive enough to maintain the legal fiction, but suppressed enough never to be a threat. Until now. Kale's silver eyes blazed with protective fury as he studied the evidence of decades-long conspiracy. Until you awakened and became exactly what they feared most. The war room door burst open without ceremony, admitting Beta Marcus with an expression of barely controlled panic. Your Majesty, he said, we have a problem. Seraphina's family has issued an ultimatum. Proceed with the betrothal as planned, or they withdraw their military support and form an alliance with the Eastern Kingdoms. Let them, Kale replied without hesitation. You don't understand. Without their forces, we lack the strength to defend against the Eastern advance. Our borders will fall within months. Kyle stood slowly, his presence filling the room with alpha authority that made Marcus step back involuntarily. Then we'll find another way to defend our territory. What we won't do is reward murderers with royal marriage. The pack won't survive without that alliance, Marcus pressed. Thousands will die if the Eastern forces breach our defences. And my parents died so this alliance could exist, Lyra added quietly, along with every other Silver Moon bloodline member who stood between Seraphina's family and ultimate power. The weight of impossible choices settled over the room like a shroud. Kyle could choose love and watch his kingdom burn, or accept political necessity and reward the very people who had orchestrated genocide. There has to be another option, he said, but his voice carried doubt that hadn't been there before. There is. Lyra stood from her chair, moving to the window where she could see the compound bustling with activity below. War beasts trained with their handlers, warriors practiced combat formations, and life continued as if the world weren't balanced on a knife's edge. What do you mean? Kyle moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I mean, I could leave. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced them out anyway. Disappear again. Let the world believe the Silver Moon bloodline died with me. You marry Seraphina, secure your alliance and protect your people. No. The word came out as a growl that made every surface in the room vibrate with suppressed power. It's the logical choice, Lyra continued, though each word felt like swallowing glass. Your kingdom survives, the conspiracy remains hidden, and I go back to being nobody. You are not nobody. Kyle's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his blazing silver gaze. You are my mate. You are the rightful queen of the Silver Moon dynasty. You are the woman I would burn the world to protect. Even if protecting me destroys your kingdom? The question hung between them like a blade, cutting through every rational argument and political calculation to the raw truth beneath. Yes, he said simply, even then. Through the bond connecting them, Lyra felt the absolute certainty behind his words. He would choose her over duty, love over logic, even if it meant watching everything he had built crumble to dust. It was exactly what she had hoped for, and exactly what she had feared. I won't let you do that, she said softly. You don't have a choice in this. Don't I? Power flickered behind her golden eyes, and for a moment the room filled with silver light that made even Kale's wolf submit. I'm not the powerless servant I was a week ago. I'm the awakened heir to the most powerful bloodline in recorded history. I think I get to choose my own fate. Before he could argue, footsteps in the corridor announced new arrivals. The door opened to reveal Seraphina, flanked by two of her family's enforcers, her beautiful face wearing an expression of cold satisfaction. How touching, she said, taking in the evidence scattered across the table without apparent concern. The lost princess and her noble king, planning their tragic romance while the world burns around them. Get out, Kale's voice carried enough alpha command to make the stone walls tremble. Oh, I don't think so. Seraphina smiled, and it was the expression of a predator who had cornered her prey. You see, I have something you both need to hear. The Eastern armies, they're already mobilizing, not in response to our negotiations, but because we invited them months ago. The implications hit like a physical blow. Marcus staggered, Elderthorn's face went pale, and Kale's power flared with homicidal rage. You orchestrated this entire crisis, Lyra said, her awakened senses reading the truth in Seraphina's scent. The assassination attempts, the political pressure, even the invasion threat. Brilliant, isn't it? Seraphina's smile widened. Create the problem, then position yourself as the only solution. Marry the Alpha King, eliminate the Silver Moon threat, and rule through a puppet who believes he chose love over duty. Except I awakened, Lyra pointed out. A minor setback, easily corrected. Seraphina nodded to her enforcers, who stepped forward with weapons that gleamed with silver coating. The Eastern armies will arrive tomorrow. You can die a martyr defending your people, or you can accept reality and disappear quietly. The war room erupted in supernatural tension as 3 alpha-level powers faced off in the space of heartbeats. Kyle's rage, Seraphina's ambition, and Lyra's awakened royalty created a pressure that threatened to shatter every piece of glass in the compound. But it was Lyra who spoke first, her voice carrying an authority that made even the stones seem to listen. You made one mistake in your perfect plan, she said, power flowing through her words like liquid silver. Oh, what's that? You assumed I would run. And as if summoned by her declaration, every war beast in the compound began to howl, their voices rising in a harmony that shook the very foundations of the earth. The altar was drowning in white roses and lies. Lyra watched from the forest's edge as the pack prepared for Kyle's forced mating ceremony with Seraphina, every detail perfect except for the groom's obvious misery. White silk banners fluttered in the morning breeze, covering the compound in full celebration, while Eastern armies gathered at their borders like storm clouds on the horizon. She could feel Kyle through their bond, each surge of his anguish hitting her like a physical blow. 20 miles of distance meant nothing when their souls were connected by threads stronger than steel. His pain was her pain, his desperation her desperation, and the wrongness of what was about to happen made her awakened wolf pace frantically in her chest. But she had made her choice. Disappear quietly, let the world believe she had died, allow Kyle to secure the alliance that would save his people. It was logical, rational, the right thing to do. It was also killing them both. The bond between true mates wasn't meant to be severed by duty or distance. Every mile she had travelled away from the compound had felt like tearing pieces from her soul. By the time the ceremony was complete and the mating bite sealed Kyle to another woman, the bond pain would likely destroy her completely. At least then he would be free to love someone else. Through the trees she could see the ceremony beginning. Pack members arranged themselves according to rank, while visiting dignitaries took places of honour. Seraphina stood radiant in silver silk that caught the morning light, every inch the perfect alpha queen she had been bred to be. And there was Kyle, magnificent in ceremonial robes that did nothing to hide the tension coiled through his powerful frame. Even from this distance, Lyra could see the way his hands clenched at his sides, the rigid set of his shoulders that spoke of a man walking toward his own execution. The officiant began speaking, his words carrying across the compound in ritual phrases older than memory. Words about unity and strength and political alliance, dressed up in the language of love. Lyra pressed her hand to her chest as the first wave of bond pain hit. Golden threads that connected her to Kyle pulled taut, stretching thin under the weight of what was about to happen. Soon they would snap entirely, and she would become truly nobody again. Maybe that would be easier. The ceremony progressed through ancient vows and political promises. Seraphina's responses were perfectly modulated, each word chosen to project strength and grace. Kyle's voice carried no emotion at all, as if he had locked away every feeling in order to survive this moment. Then came the exchange of rings, metal circles that symbolized unbreakable bonds forged in politics rather than love. That was when Lyra felt it. Not bond pain this time, but something else entirely. A pulling sensation that had nothing to do with her connection to Kyle and everything to do with the awakened power flowing through her veins. Every war beast within 50 miles was calling to her, their voices rising in a harmony that spoke of loyalty stronger than duty. They knew this was wrong. They could sense the false ceremony taking place, could feel their true queen's anguish even from a distance, and they were rejecting it with every fibre of their supernatural beings. In the compound, the war beasts began to howl. Fenrir's voice rose above all others, a mournful sound that spoke of loss and betrayal and bonds that couldn't be severed by human convenience. Other voices joined his until the very air rang with their protest. The ceremony faltered as the officiant tried to speak over the supernatural cacophony. Guests looked around nervously as the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with the force of dozens of massive creatures expressing their disapproval. But it was Kyle's reaction that broke Lyra's heart completely. His control finally cracked. She felt it through the bond like a dam bursting, 24 hours of suppressed agony flooding through their connection with enough force to drive her to her knees. His wolf was tearing him apart from the inside, fighting against every word of the ceremony with violent desperation. He couldn't do this. Neither of them could survive what was happening here. Lyra rose from her hiding place and began to run. Not away from the compound this time, but toward it. Toward Kyle and the impossible choice that had driven them both to the brink of madness. Her awakened abilities carried her faster than any normal wolf could move, silver power flowing through her legs as she covered miles in minutes. Behind her she could hear them coming. Every war beast that had been calling to her was now following her, their massive forms crashing through the forest like a supernatural army responding to their queen's summons. The ceremony was reaching its climax as she broke through the tree line. The officiant had reached the final vows, the words that would bind Kale to Seraphina in bonds that couldn't be easily broken. Do you, Alpha King Kale of the Northern Kingdoms, take Seraphina of the Eastern Alliance as your mate and queen, to rule beside you in strength and unity until— No. Kale's voice carried across the compound with enough force to make every wolf present drop to their knees in automatic submission. I do not take her as my mate. I do not accept this alliance. I reject everything about this farce. Chaos erupted as political consequences became suddenly irrelevant in the face of supernatural truth. But before anyone could respond, the ground began to shake with the approach of dozens of war beasts answering their queen's call. Lyra emerged from the forest like vengeance given form, power radiating from her skin in waves of silver light. Behind her came every war beast in the territory, their loyalty absolute and their purpose clear. She had stopped running. The pack stared in shock as she walked toward the altar, her golden eyes fixed on Kyle with an intensity that made the very air shimmer. This wasn't the invisible servant they remembered. This was royalty awakened, power reclaimed, destiny finally embraced. You came back, Kyle said, wonder and relief flooding through their bond like warm honey. I couldn't let you do this, Lyra replied, her voice carrying across the compound with supernatural clarity. I couldn't let them win. Seraphina's mask of perfection finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. It's too late. The ceremony is nearly complete, the alliance is sealed, and the Eastern armies will find themselves facing the awakened Silver Moon bloodline and every war beast in the realm, Lyra interrupted. Somehow, I don't think they're prepared for that kind of welcome. And as if to emphasize her point, Fenrir padded to her side and dropped into his familiar bow, followed immediately by every other war beast present. The false ceremony was over. The real battle was about to begin.